It seems many within the anime community complain about a lull in creativity within the medium, whether it be from year to year, season to season, and even series to series. An overwhelming majority use well-developed phrases like same old, and anime's just kinda shit now. But are they really wrong? And also, what happens when we finally end up getting such a unique series only to find out it may be, well, a bit too unique? This is the story of today's anime, Mysterious Girlfriend X. I want to first preface this review with the following. If you've been looking for a somewhat decent new romantic comedy anime to watch, then you may enjoy this series, going in knowing as little as possible. The initial surprise of its premise is worth checking out, at the very least the first episode blind. I promise it will be worth it. As for the rest of the series and the many issues I have against it, including said premise, I'll be diving through liters and liters of drool-filled spoilers, so you've been warned. But then again, a spoiler warning only should exist if there's anything of value to actually spoil. Mysterious Girlfriend X follows our male lead, Tsubaki, an intentionally painfully dull high school student who's very much naive in the undergoings and complexities of high school relationships, love, and everything in between. Enter Mikoto Urabe, the new mysterious transfer student to his class, with her own varying quirks, such as bursting out into dramatic, uncontrollable laughter during class one day. Tsubaki's naivety and Urabe's alluring yet twisted demeanor leads to an event where he ends up tasting the drool of his new transfer student, and, well, loving it. Not just loving it, these characters soon form a bond in an entire relationship based on this young girl's saliva, where after walking home each day after school, Tsubaki is given a new drool-covered finger to consume. The show meanders slowly, building on the drool-related fascination. Expanding on its spiritual and cosmic properties dispersed throughout it are some rather interesting dream sequences that are so visually interesting they kind of clash with its bland counterpart, aka the rest of the show. To best point out many of my issues with Mysterious Girlfriend X, it's important to deconstruct romance anime as a whole. So we have the two leads, who of course love each other, the side characters who we compare and contrast them to, and lastly, we have conflict, usually in the form of misunderstanding. In my opinion, the series really only succeeds at the conflict. It easily brings in many misunderstandings and issues within the relationship, but the conclusion of these strifes never actually lead to any kind of valuable payoff. Like, there's a scene later on in the series where Urabe's new short-lived haircut leads a lot of the male students to finally start noticing her and taking interest, much to the dismay of Tsubaki. They then begin to compare her to a famous idol. Tsubaki goes to the bookstore like any normal male high school student does in the modern age, picks up a copy of the latest photo shoot of said model, gets extremely aroused by a picture of the girl smiling, because why not, is later found out by Urabe, scolded, and the magazine is comedically cut up. End of episode. Fine. This followed a rather simple story structure and had a beginning, the haircut, a middle, the magazine, and an end, the cutting up of said magazine. And if that's where the plotline ended, it would have been fine. But then literally at the start of the next episode, right after Tsubaki is leaving the same exact bookstore with another magazine of said model, saying something along the lines of, "I really have to make sure Urabe doesn't find out this time," despite him supposedly learning his lesson and greatly hurting her feelings. I outlined one single occasion where Tsubaki's inconsiderate, but the show is riddled with so many of these moments, ranging from touching Urabe when she's not comfortable with being touched, to not understanding her basic emotions, to the point where it's easier to list the number of times Tsubaki is a dick instead of when he's a decent boyfriend/human being. Sure, you can argue that it's young love and he's inept on the ins and outs of the average relationship, but you can't argue that him as a character does not grow at all throughout this series and only seems to get worse as it goes on. It's frustrating to the viewer to know before any given scene that it will literally go nowhere, and at times the story will even regress and go backwards. You could argue that summarizes most romantic anime as a whole if you want to be snarky. However, Mysterious Girlfriend X takes this to a different, frustratingly high level. Before moving on to more of my gripes with this series, let's talk about the few things I actually did enjoy about the show, so I can pretend I'm not biased, even though I even though I am. From a technical standpoint, while the animation art tended to be a bit bland, I like how they kind of capture 80s and 90s character design. I found the score to be unique and interesting, although certain tracks seem to repeat far too many times, especially the song that accompanies any kind of mysterious element of the show, and the character Oka was just honestly so much fun to watch. She served as a foil to Tsubaki's and Urabe's relationship and was one of the only characters to befriend Urabe. She's an adorable ball of energy and is extremely open and says what's on her mind, a foil indeed to all the other characters who enjoy keeping everything bottled up and then forcing their girlfriend to the ground so they can lick their earlobe. And I don't mind the drool gimmick, but sadly it barely got expanded on. Most scenes and conflicts end with, "Hey, Tsubaki, taste this." Then either his nose bleeds or he cries because of their bond, and the credits, rinse and repeat. But yeah, that's about all I could think of in terms of enjoyment of the series itself. Let me compare Mysterious Girlfriend X to a similar romantic comedy series I just finished, My Love Story, a series which I highly recommend that actually takes its time with developing the relationship between the large ogre-like teenager with a heart of gold Takio and the tiny precious Yamato. During the last few episodes of each series, there's a plot development of a romantic rival, which is usually used to test the already existing relationship. If the couple's tribulations before this point don't feel like they are done well, then the payoff for the romantic rival naturally losing in the end doesn't feel earned. Takio in My Love Story ends up being the better man and ends up helping said rival in a time of need, knowing full well that his intentions are to steal Takio's girlfriend. Takio as a character does what he's been doing since the first episode, being a nice guy. In Mysterious Girlfriend X, Tsubaki bumps into a junior high school crush, sneaks behind Urabe's back without telling her, lies to her more, and nearly consumes the drool from the girl, not once, but twice. Naturally, Urabe comes and saves the day and changes Tsubaki's mind, but what makes this character worth fighting for and proving anything to anyway? Sure, they have their drool bond, but so do her and Oka, and half of the relationship is a lying, manipulative fuckboy, and the other half is a supposedly mysterious girlfriend, as the series name implies, but turns out to just be a walking blind drool dispenser who keeps scissors in her panties because quirky. Why write the characters to be quirky or interesting when you can just throw gimmick after gimmick on top of them and pander to the lesser fetishes to blind the average viewer? The majority of these complaints come down to bad writing and scripting, whether that's because the original source material of this work is just poor to begin with, which is honestly probably the case because this was only the author's second big work, but it could also be the adaptation itself was poorly led, and squeezing an ongoing 8-year-long manga into a 13-episode anime was difficult. Regardless, the series was greenlit and the anime should be able to stand on its own. So let's go back to the last scene I was talking about with Urabe's love rival, the one Tsubaki had a crush on throughout junior high before they went off to separate schools. She pops back into the story now with short hair, recently broke up with her boyfriend and wants to find someone to talk to. Tsubaki lies and says he does not have a girlfriend and then pretty much says that I will only talk to you again if you give me some of your drool. I'm not even kidding. Naturally, he backs off before it actually happens, just like every interaction he's ever had throughout the series thus far, but this sets her plan into motion. Basically, she fakes having a bruise given to her by her ex to make Tsubaki come to her cultural festival and pretend to be her boyfriend to make sure he doesn't come near her. Naturally, this is all a lie. She then gives an invite to Urabe so that she'll find her and Tsubaki together, get jealous, and break up with him. Pretty classic sitcom plan. But then for whatever reason, after holding hands for maybe a minute or two, she takes Tsubaki up to the unused 3rd floor of the high school, where literally nobody can see the pair of them, thus Urabe would never ever see them together. So what was the point of all this again? Also, here's a real line of dialogue that is later said by this supposed high school girl. Do the colors of love always fade, no matter how vibrant they are? Sure, you could argue that the English translation may vary quite a bit, but if it's anything close to that, then it's a cringy mess regardless. Nothing flows correctly in this show, none of it feels genuine, and not for a second did I find myself immersed enough to think these are actually characters, and not just a stream of saliva that the author drooled onto the page one day that somehow mixed with a jar of ink and assembled themselves into the words and art that make up the manga. In conclusion, Mysterious Girlfriend X is a show that puts a lot of people off with its drool and various other fetishes, but looking past that, the show put me off on a fundamental level, consisting of an unbearable main cast, poor writing, and barely fleshed out, frustrating romance hidden behind the drool gimmick itself. It's a shame that there are bits and pieces of value within the mess that stick out, but they only serve to reinforce how poorly just about everything else was implemented in comparison. If you're dying for a new romantic comedy anime with a twist, then maybe you'll find what you want here, but for those who value their time and salival glands, then it's no mystery that you should seek out more consistent and better executed alternatives. Also, how do you even get that much drool? Like, that is an unhealthy amount of saliva to the point where it coats the index finger of a high school girl several times over. Like, let me try to replicate that amount of liquid. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Hey, it's Anigami, and when I'm not delivering a heaping helping of my wet drool into my high school boyfriend's waiting mouth, I make various videos here on YouTube, so feel free to stick around a bit and check some out. Appreciate the support.